Time is running out for Cuba, and the clock is ticking louder than ever. The island nation has been struggling for decades, but the loss of its key backer in Venezuela has pushed it to the brink in ways that feel unprecedented. As reports from reliable sources indicate, Cuba is staring down the barrel of less than 3 weeks' worth of oil to cover its basic needs. Once those reserves dry up, the lights could go out across much of the country for extended periods, forcing the government into drastic rationing that will hit every corner of daily life. Factories still limping along will likely grind to a halt. The already fragile tourism sector faces total meltdown, and rolling blackouts will intensify to levels that test the limits of endurance. For the communist leadership, this crisis rivals anything seen since the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, perhaps even surpassing it in its potential to unravel the entire system. These alarming headlines aren't isolated anymore. They're piling up with relentless frequency. Just think back to that record power failure on January 31, 2025, when 63% of the island sat in darkness on a single Saturday. It all traces back to that pivotal moment on January 8, 1959, when a youthful Fidel Castro, just 32 years old, rolled into Havana at the head of his triumphant caravan. Riding in jeeps through streets packed with ecstatic supporters, he declared victory over tyranny and vowed that this revolution would seize control once and for all. History shows he delivered on that promise with ironclad determination. The Castro regime has now endured for 67 years, transforming Cuba into one of the most enduring authoritarian states on the planet. For much of the 20th century, it wasn't just surviving. It was punching far above its weight, exporting Marxist ideologies, backing uprisings across Latin America, and even projecting influence into Africa. Those glory days, however, belong firmly to the past. The turning point came after the dramatic ouster of Nicolás Maduro and the emergence of Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela's Bolivarian leadership. One non-negotiable condition from Washington for any thaw in relations was an immediate end to all support for Havana, and Caracas complied without hesitation. Oil deliveries that once averaged 46,500 barrels daily in December plummeted straight to zero. This sudden cutoff, which we highlighted in earlier discussions here on Critical Hour Report, left Mexico as the island's final lifeline supplier, outpacing even the remnants of Venezuelan aid. But the latest developments have slammed that door shut too. Under intense pressure from the United States, Mexico has been compelled to slash its exports, shifting from a modest buffer designed to nudge negotiations without total economic paralysis to something far more punitive. Cuba now stands utterly vulnerable, stripped of its primary energy crutch. The island had leaned so heavily on Venezuelan crude that the void feels existential. With Mexico buckling to American demands, amid looming NAFTA renegotiations and Trump's pointed warnings about cartels, even floating the specter of direct intervention, Havana finds itself isolated like never before. Mexican officials in the capital are in no position to risk their own bilateral ties with Washington for old ideological allies. This leaves the Cuban government in dire straits, no matter how defiantly President Miguel Diaz-Canel speaks of the people's willingness to shed blood for the revolution. Such rhetoric rings hollow today, revealing instead a stubborn refusal to confront the model's fundamental flaws. Flaws that have proven not just unsustainable, but utterly beyond repair. Recall how Maduro once boasted of massive militias ready to defend his regime. We witnessed how quickly that bravado crumbled under real pressure. The raw statistics paint a grim picture that no amount of official spin can soften. In all of January, Cuba scraped together a mere 800 barrels of oil, barely a tenth of the daily average from the already punishing year of 2025, when blackouts and shortages were already routine. Yet the country's bare minimum energy needs hover between 70,000 and 100,000 barrels each day just to avoid total shutdown. Consider the scale. With roughly 10 to 11 million people, Cuba consumes far more per capita in inefficiency than neighbors like Puerto Rico, home to about 3 million and burning through 100,000 barrels daily, or Panama, with under half Cuba's population yet using around 140,000. Aging infrastructure, outdated facilities, and heavy reliance on oil-fired power plants only compound the inefficiency, making every drop count for more than it should. Locally, the island squeezes out 30,000 to 40,000 barrels on its own, but the shortfall must come from imports, and funds for those purchases have evaporated. In 2025, inflows averaged under 37,000 barrels daily, courtesy of discounted deals from Venezuela and Mexico tied to exporting Cuban doctors and security forces. Now, with those pipelines closed and no cash reserves, the math simply doesn't add up. Reserves at the start of January sat around 460,000 barrels. Factoring in January's meager arrivals, the total barely topped 545,000, enough for roughly 2 weeks at recent consumption rates or just a week at survival levels. Refineries sit idle without crude, and the last fuel delivery docked back in November. This isn't a temporary hiccup. It's a full-scale catastrophe barreling toward economic oblivion, where power, transport, agriculture, and industry all risk simultaneous failure. Energy woes, however, are only part of the unraveling. The broader society is crumbling under its own weight. Since 2021, official counts show over 1 million Cubans. Fully 10% of the population have fled in search of better lives. Finding anyone under 40 eager to remain on the island grows rarer by the day, and who can blame them? Average monthly earnings for most hover around a mere $10, while rationing dictates everything from bread portions to basic staples. Poverty has surged to crushing levels. Hunger, once uncommon, now stalks communities, and infant mortality rates have more than doubled per government data. The physical decay is everywhere. Infrastructure erodes, services falter. Layer on the blackouts and the human toll escalates dramatically. In Cuba's sweltering, humid climate, electricity loss means rapid food spoilage, unreliable water supplies, and heightened disease risks. Life simplifies into a daily grind of scarcity and discomfort, sparing only the tiny elite circle of party insiders and military brass who still enjoy imported luxuries like new vehicles or upscale dining. Even families sustained by overseas remittances watch their quality of life erode swiftly. Without swift reversal, projections point to hardships deepening far beyond current thresholds. None of this stems from coincidence or oversight. The American insistence on halting Mexican shipments forms the core of a deliberate strategy to compel real change in Havana. President Trump has signaled unequivocally his intent to cut off the oil lifeline until the leadership has no choice but to negotiate or collapse. An executive order already paves the way for tariffs on imports from any nation continuing to supply Cuba with petroleum, signaling Marco Rubio's broader maximum pressure doctrine in action. The economic stranglehold has grown so tight that it now poses a genuine threat to the regime's very survival. Yet one must pause and ask, does this pressure truly rise to an existential level? Or could the island weather yet another storm? History offers some perspective here. Cuba has navigated severe energy famines before, most notably in the 1990s after the USSR's demise, enduring profound shortages through sheer resilience and improvisation. The regime does possess a few short-term lifelines. Domestic oil output continues at that modest 30,000 to 40,000 barrel clip, providing a thin baseline. Sugarcane bagasse, the fibrous leftover from sugar processing, contributes a small but expandable share of electricity, around 4% currently, and could ramp up significantly during the harvest season ending in May. Such biomass boosts have bought breathing space in prior crises, offering temporary relief if leveraged aggressively. Cuban officials may well be banking on external factors to limit the squeeze. Overly aggressive moves from Washington risk sparking another mass exodus toward U.S. shores, echoing the 1994 Balsero crisis that sent thousands afloat in makeshift rafts. American leaders dread repeating that chaotic scene, handing Havana a subtle but potent negotiating card. Still, even these buffers look shaky against the mounting pressures. Compounding the energy disaster is the free fall in what was once a cornerstone of regime survival. Tourism. For years, the industry symbolized hope, drawing visitors with visions of mojitos sipped in Havana's vibrant streets, pristine Caribbean beaches, and a sense of exotic safety. It wasn't peripheral. It delivered nearly 20% of foreign currency in 2023 and absorbed over 35% of national investments. Now, that dream has shattered. Visitor numbers have plunged from 4.7 million in 2017 to about 2.2 million in 2024, and a projected 1.8 million or fewer in 2025, a staggering 60% plus decline. Those who still arrive spend far less, draining the lifeblood from an already anemic economy. The outlook for 2026 appears even bleaker, with blackouts threatening the very basics of hospitality. Hotels may promise meals and bottled water for paying guests, but reliable electricity. That's another story entirely, prompting travel advisories for visitors to pack flashlights, portable fans, and backup chargers. Power failures mean more than inconvenience. Showers run cold or not at all, and basic comforts vanish. Years of emigration have hollowed out the workforce, leaving the sector short of trained staff. Declining revenues have forced deferred maintenance, while systemic corruption within the military, which controls much of the prime infrastructure through entities like GAES, exacerbates shortages. Hotels, often managed by foreign chains, must source supplies from state monopolies that frequently stock nothing essential, like fresh mint for a simple cocktail. The outcome, subpar experiences in rundown properties, plagued by flickering lights and empty shelves, driving travelers toward competitors in places like the Dominican Republic. Major tour operators have pulled out, wary of sanctions and poor returns. This double blow, oil cutoff paired with tourism's collapse, strips away the regime's last viable revenue streams, rendering survival nearly unthinkable. Memories of better times linger painfully. Back in 2016, a US presidential visit to Havana eased sanctions and sparked a brief boom. Platforms like Airbnb launched, and chains such as Marriott debuted properties, injecting fresh energy into the economy. For a fleeting moment, relations seemed poised for a breakthrough, with leaders acknowledging shared histories and cultural bonds, like distant siblings reconnecting after years apart. Yet, Havana's rulers squandered the opening. Rather than pursue genuine reforms, outreach, or compromises, they doubled down on isolation and control. The window slammed shut. By 2017, restrictions returned under Trump, curtailed flights, banned cruises, reinstated penalties, and bans on stays in military-linked hotels. Even under Biden in 2022, visa waiver programs excluded recent Cuba visitors, deterring at least 40% of potential tourists, wary of future U.S. travel complications. The leadership's short-sightedness, rigid ideology, and failure to adapt have alienated even traditional partners. Beijing, despite public rhetoric of fraternal solidarity, has grown visibly frustrated with Cuba's refusal to modernize. Deep in debt and lacking any reform roadmap, Havana now finds the Chinese spigot tightening as well. On Critical Hour report, we see Cuba's predicament as profoundly dire, with Washington betting that this convergence of crises will finally extract meaningful concessions and reforms. The regime may stand at its most vulnerable point since the revolution's dawn. Inaction invites total implosion, one way or another, yet an entrenched, aging leadership clings to outdated doctrines. The coming months will reveal whether external pressure yields transformation or merely prolonged suffering for everyday citizens. In the end, as Cuba teeters on this precipice, one cannot help but reflect. When a system built on defiance finally confronts the limits of its own isolation, does it bend toward renewal or shatter under the weight of its unyielding past? The answer may reshape not only the island's future, but the broader lessons for enduring authoritarian resilience in our turbulent world.